Hello and welcome to the 12th episode of the Powerless Podcast. Thanks for chiming in for this one. I'm super excited for this episode. In this one, I get to talk to Garrett Russell, vocalist and lyricist of the band Silent Planet. Anyone who knows me knows this is seriously one of my favorite bands of all time. I did not expect to be able to get him on this early on in the show. So I was super excited to do this one. We went for a good amount of time. This one's going to be the longest episode we've done so far. And I just really hope you guys like it. Garrett was awesome to talk to. It was a really great conversation. We started off with kind of talking about some political and social issues and also looking at some of Garrett's influence in his lyrics, whether it's from authors like C.S. Lewis or different philosophers and different, like I said, social and political issues that maybe don't get talked about a lot in this genre of progressive metal or metalcore. So it was a super fun conversation. We talked about kind of the toxicity of online politics and partisanship in this country. We talked about kind of, like I said, Garrett's influences with where he's at, where he came to kind of the ideology and understanding he has. We talked about Christianity, kind of gave him my spiel on it, and went back and forth a bit on the ethics of things and how a lot of times belief gets co-opted into being used for some really reactionary bad things when there's a lot of good that can come from spirituality and beliefs. We also dive into later on in the episode 2 of their songs, one of the newest ones from their record Iridescent called Alive as a Housefire. Garrett kind of talks about something for the first time on this podcast about that song that he hasn't talked about before. That was really interesting concerning the music industry in the wake of the George Floyd protests, and kind of like the business tactics that were kind of maybe a bit cynically driven behind some people's sudden decision to talk a bit briefly about social issues when they didn't before. We also talk about native blood and some implications behind that. And overall, it was just a really good chat about things that Garrett and I both really find interesting and really find important. So I really hope you guys enjoy it. If you're new to the podcast, which this one might get a few new viewers, make sure to follow on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, and also email me at thepowerlesspod@gmail.com. All of those handles are at thepowerlesspod. Please reach out if you want to be on the show, whether you're a musician, producer, songwriter, whatever, as well as community organizer or political advocate in any way. I like to talk to both musicians, people in the music industry, and people that are focused on social and political issues. It's kind of what this whole podcast is about. And that's why this episode was great, because it was kind of best of both worlds. So I really hope you guys enjoy it. And like I said, just reach out to me afterwards, like and subscribe, hit all those buttons on wherever you listen to podcasts so you get kind of notified of the next ones coming up. We have some really great up and coming bands coming out on here next with bands like With Sales Ahead. There's also going to be some other ones that are getting recorded that'll be up in the next coming weeks. So just again, thanks for checking this out. And without any more rambling than I've already done, here is Garrett Russell, vocalist of Silent Planet, on the Powerless Podcast. All right, I'm here with Garrett Russell from Silent Planet for the Powerless Podcast. I know I just said this before, but Garrett, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Yeah, just this is it's nice to be here. I'm glad we could put this together so fast.
Yeah, me too. I've been a fan of your band for a long time. I actually found out about it from another podcast, like back in 2017 or 2018 or something.
What podcast do you remember?
It was the Lead Singer Syndrome one with Shane. Yeah. Because you're like the one person that's been on there, I think, like three times or something like that. Yeah. And I right after that, I saw you at the tour with years are off for me. I don't know if it was 20. It's just pre-COVID is how I can view time. But it was with August Burns Red and Silverstein.
2019.
Yeah, 2019. Okay. And that was when I really, really, really got into the band because, even for like an opening set, which sometimes like at a House of Blues venue or something, they like it feels like sometimes they intentionally kind of lower the volume for an opening band or something like that. You guys just knocked it out of the park, and I got to chat with you for a little bit after, and it was just it's really fun. So I started doing a deep dive on your band, and you guys are probably now one of my favorite bands I've found over the past decade or so.
Wow, thank you.
For a couple of reasons. Like, one, obviously I'm a big fan of the, more modern metal, metalcore, progressive metal, whatever you want to throw out there, genre. And I'm also somebody that's like very into, social issues and politics and history and literature and all those kinds of things. And so that's like right up the alley of what you tend to write about a lot, right? So, for starting off, like one of my favorite books, and I know people don't usually like to talk about like the origin of a band name, but even like one of my favorite books that I've read over the past several years was Out of the Silent Planet, and that whole trilogy, and Abolition of Man, and some C.S. Lewis books and things like that. And I saw even from the most recent album that Till We Have Faces, clearly a reference to the book from C.S. Lewis is in there. So you're still, 4 records in over a decade later, still referencing C.S. Lewis, right? So, so has a lot of like, obviously you write about things through history and things like that. And I'd like to actually kind of go into and deep dive some songs and kind of reference some social and political issues with you, if that's cool, that kind of go along with those. But as C.S. Lewis, just like all of his different writings, what kind of about that is something that you keep going back to or other books as well, that for lyrical content and influence and all those things?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the reason why Silent Planet really stuck well for us is I can't say that it's like a book that I love. It's not like a book that I feel like as a whole I go back to a lot. The name actually came from is in 2009. Our drummer at the time, who's still a good friend of mine, we had like band names that we were throwing around, and then he was like, what about Silent Planet? And it's his favorite book. Okay. He hasn't been in the band since 2012, but I think the name stuck, and I think the reason it stuck, and the thing about like the core or for me, I guess the core concept in Silent Planet is this idea that like we are humans. We are like the bent people, that like there's something that's kind of out of whack with us that really leads to like the existential condition of like we live inside our own universes sort of meaning. And it can be a very lonely experience. Life can, because we try to communicate with language, but language is often very, ineffective of a tool, and sometimes kind of furthers the divide for people. And I think that idea really resonated with me. And I think that's an idea that if you look for it, kind of pops up a lot in the lyrical themes and in sort of the stories we're telling and how we tell them. So, yeah, I think that I think that in that way, Silent Planet, the book is very relevant for us as a band. And I think, I just, I've always admired a lot of C.S. Lewis's writing, and I don't think you really have to be I think some of his work is pretty explicitly like for Christians or for people that want to know more about the Christian faith. But I think a lot of his writing too is just pretty like wise spiritual writing and stuff that I agree. Think a lot of people from different backgrounds and traditions can get a lot from. But I think and some of it's just I just like the way that he does language, if that makes sense. I like his.
It does.
his mastery of the language on an aesthetic level too.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And to talk about that a little bit with that writing, and he is one of those few authors that is like clearly, there's no ifs, ands, or buts that it's like, Christian focused writing some of the time. But, even like Abolition of Man, which is one of my favorite writings he did, that was more like, I think it's I'm a little fuzzy on it because it's been a couple of years since I read it, but it was, some different lectures and things he had done that essentially looked at the question of, is morality, like a subjective construct? Does it exist? Would it exist outside of things like God or religion? And in some ways, at the end of it, kind of the conclusion he says is that yes, like there is a semblance of morality and spirituality and things of that nature outside of Christian religion or spiritual focus, which was really cool to read from someone that is clearly has their own faith that they write about, but they still looked at things very objectively and intelligently. And it was easy to read, which a lot of that stuff sometimes goes a little over my head when you have those big question, existential writings, and he finds a way to not dumb it down, but make it accessible for someone like me, where, some of those writings from other people might be just as good or better, but like the vocabulary can pull you off, or it's very like educational.
Yeah, it can get so steeped in academic language that like you would need courses in previous topics to even begin to like unpack it. Yeah, I think that's one of the great gifts of C.S. Lewis is really like having a heart for communication with everyone.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And for me personally, and this is another reason why I really, I think I really started getting into your band, is I grew up very, very religious in like an evangelical conservative background. I'm not that anymore by any stretch of the imagination. But it's cool to both read from that and also see through your guys' lyrics. And I know, no one likes, we're not going to talk about the label of Christian band or whatever the hell that even means anymore, because it doesn't mean anything, right? Like it was, it's just what people write about and what their influences are and what their perspectives are from any topic, right? But I liked seeing things from your band, that while you have that influence and that background and that faith and everything else, that you were still writing about things that I like connected with me morally, where I felt like part of the reason why I left my beliefs in the church and things like that a lot was because I just didn't agree with what I was hearing all the time. Right. Like, I'm part of, you go through all these different phases of jadedness and then acceptance and all those kind of things. And I'm not here to talk about me, but what I mean is, that's where like the connection of your lyrics were like, I don't know. And there's more bands with those influences now, which is cool to see that, you can have that background and yet you don't have to stick into this cliche pigeonhole of, evangelical reactionary beliefs that really, if you look into theology, are at odds, right? Like that's another great thing I kind of pulled from your band, getting into the content and everything.
Yeah, that's definitely something that blew my mind to learn about when I was in college and just started like reading more and was directed to read, I guess, a lot of helpful materials, realizing that like, American evangelicism, or some people would say like Christian nationalism, or some people might use the term dispensationalism, when it comes to eschatology, all that stuff is like actually fairly in the scope of Christian history, is all like very new.
Right.
And a lot of times it's given to people like, well, this is traditional Christianity and, anything else is a deviation from it. And actually know that, no, I think a lot of traditions might say this is heretical, was really helpful and empowering to me, because it always seemed wrong on its face. Like when you read about just Jesus, if you just read the actual books of the gospel, and then you like, I don't know, hear what comes out of like Christian conservative reactionary people, you're like, this doesn't really like feel right. But to have someone unpack that for me, that was huge. I think that was really huge.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to just like, yeah, what are you looking at? What is the focus here? Because like, I don't know. I've recently, even in my own views, where like I've, kind of view myself as atheist or agnostic or whatever, that I've tried to look more at those views of like what I would like to have community with people that believe spiritually, right?
Mm,
Like that you want to get together to have like better community, better, like to help your fellow man and everything else. And like, you don't do that on either side of the spectrum by wagging your finger at something saying that's wrong, your belief system is wrong. It's like, no, it's what you get out of it and what you do with it. Like, are you
yeah.
reading the red letters in the Bible and seeing the things of talking about, literally, um, literally like viewing wealth hoarding as like as wrong, morally, and wanting
Yeah.
to better, people that were ostracized by society at the time and all these different things. And that kind of pulls into your guys' music, where some of the different songs from like, you know whether it was socially, like with When the End Began, with like a song like Visible Unseen, or No Place to Breathe, and different things like that, where like you don't hold back on the thought of like, this is something that I think, and like you said, I should stop using probably Christian and say more like conservative, reactionary, evangelical, whatever else, that they might have the, an opposite view of this, but you can look at it from a biblical perspective or a spiritual
Yeah.
perspective. And it's like, I don't know, in my opinion, at least, clearly the opposite, right? That you should be caring for people and just loving people. And that's, you can boil it down to that simple of terms and have your social
Yeah.
outlook foster from that, right?
I think so. And I think that, I think a lot of, a lot of Christians, a lot of well-meaning, Christians even, I think have potentially accidentally sort of created a distinction between like justice and the gospel. Um, even folks who admire both or try to emulate both, they see them as separate phenomenon. That you have like social justice and you have like the gospel of Jesus, but it's it's pretty apparent that those are one and the same. Um,
Right.
uh, and I think we've a lot of Christians have done a disservice to the message of Jesus, and that and I mean that goes back to Saint Augustine. I think that goes to the Platonic view of reality, that Augustine sort of, I think, like kind of like stepping on shit and walking into someone's house, kind of like tracked into
Right.
like the gospel on accident, in my opinion, and sort of like brought forth, notions of just like the extreme dualism, and like a disembodied spirituality, which I think really is part of the issue there. But there's, we don't have to get lost in the
It's okay.
get lost in the nuances of that. But I think that it's essential that people who want to follow after the gospel understand that like there's no gospel apart from like loving these poor people and these destitute people and these disenfranchised people. And I think a lot of times those terms can so much become like buzzwords and stuff, even on line, that it's like people have an image of what that is, but then they don't. Like it's easy to like miss it if you, and that's kind of where, that's kind of like where I would be just as quick to challenge a lot of people that are like, I don't know, like reductive physicalist, super, I guess like reductive physicalist, like super, I guess like non-spiritual practicing people, is like, I don't know, like I guess my question almost to those folks might be, and maybe you could help me out with this, is like, how are you able to deny the self enough to like to do things that are uncomfortable and do things that are, you know, maybe counter to like your own progress. If you're not, you know, already sort of practicing something that teaches you that like your happiness, that what is comfortable and pleasurable for you is not actually what's important, because that's an uncommon belief, I think. Like that,
Yeah.
like I can't tell you how many bands I've toured with, or like on Warped Tour, I would hear it every day. People are like, the only fucking thing that matters in life is do whatever makes you happy. Fuck everything else.
Yeah.
Is a really common belief, if not the most common belief that's being promoted at like a rock show.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to be like, you're going to hell
No.
if you do that, or like, I hate you for doing that. But I am going to be like, how are you going to really make a meaningful change in this world if you only do what makes you happy all the time? Because growth, I think, in growth in making a change, and like stopping and talking to a homeless person and like getting to know that person so that they're no longer a homeless person, but they become like a person with a name, you know, Freddie, you know,
Right.
and you know, like where they're coming from. I do wonder how people really are prepared to do that aren't, I think, in some way going on a spiritual journey. And I don't think I'm not even really someone that's interested in being like, it has to be my journey or my tradition, but people just like completely apart from it. There's no spirit. There's no other unseen world.
Right.
I do wonder, like, how are you going to do justice? I don't think it can't be done, but I do wonder about that, you know?
Yeah. I think a big part of that is, you know, I think there's a way to have those same similar feel, you know, to go back to what you're talking about with music and how like there's a big message of, like you just said, like, fuck everybody else, do what makes you happy, because that's what at the end matters. And I think the implication is that, and I think to some extent it's true at a mass scale, unfortunately, is that people have had that happen to them so much that other people make decisions for their own happiness in their life that
they need to be empowered.
That end up jading them to where, like, that person did that for this, you know, that person, I saw them do a horrendous thing, whether it was, you know, to them or someone they saw, you know, a loved one or whatever else. And so you kind of get this critique where you feel like everyone else is just out there for themselves. So why am I going to be out there for other people where all that's going to do is going to create my own unhappiness, and you feel like it might not be making anything better for anyone else even, right? And I'm not saying that's correct. I'm just saying, I think on a mass scale, that's how, especially globally, but like to be on a soapbox for a little bit, like I think that's also pushed big time in the United States, of individualism and just like, you know, everyone's problems are their own personal moral failings, and, you know, and so when you see that's, you know, that, say, a homeless person or someone that's struggling with addiction, or somebody that's, you know, or a community that's, you know, desperate and has crime issues or whatever else, like that's a moral failing of an individual or a group of people. And it's like, no, that's like a societal ill, you know, and those people have just as much, what am I looking at? Like, just as much of a right to happiness and fulfillment as anybody else. And when there's a difference in and this is where I get in the weeds of like just numbers and stats and all that kind of stuff. But
I'm
like,
here for it.
It really does boil down to just like hoarding of things, you know, people that are in excess while other people are in need. And you know, you don't have to be some like socialist weirdo like I am to at least recognize that like there are ways to be collective in the sense of just like caring for your neighbor and caring for each other. And if that message is promoted in a loving way that's not judgmental, which I think is another problem that can happen, especially online or something, you know, just meeting people where they're at, loving people, and wanting to you know, whether it's even on a smaller scale, you know, want to make things for the betterment of the community. And I think like spirituality, I've come around to the fact that like spirituality does help with that more than like secularism sometimes for a lot of people, because you have this you have this, inherent communal aspect, right? Like you have,
Yeah, that's a big part of it.
Yeah, that crosses, socioeconomic statuses,
Yeah.
can cross like cultures and all that. And so that's where I think if it's viewed in the right way, it is a helpful tool. It took me a long time to come around to that. About 10 years ago, I kind of left my own faith and stuff like that. I was so jaded that like every problem was religion, and it's like, no, actually every problem is like a society, is in society. It's not because somebody believes something, it's because people have certain views that are, so I know I'm just rambling here, but people have just certain views that that are just passed down and become nihilistic or just so individualistic that they kind of lose the plot, I guess,
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's weirdly it's this like subtly sinister kind of thing that happens where like a lot of really harmful ideology gets just sort of baked in, and even though it's maybe never explicitly stated, it's kind of implied for a lot of people that like part of being a Christian is all these other political assumptions. And
yeah,
and that's why I think the term deconstruction is so common these days, because there's a lot of negatives that have come with the internet, social media, also a lot of positives, and one of those is like stuff that like I learned in college. I'm old, so like I was in college. I was a freshman in college in 2008, and like I learned a lot of stuff that now I feel like I just read on the internet all the time,
right.
But like to me, I was like, whoa, like the Bible doesn't actually explicitly talk about homosexuality. They're talking like about like forced pederasty. Like that's crazy, like that was a wild thing. And now it's just like I can like read that on the internet, if you follow like the right people. And so I think that as that information's been disseminated, I do think that a lot of people's imaginations are being liberated. I think you brought up a great point with community. I think that's another failure of modernism. I was talking about this with my bandmate yesterday, how like this is true. I said this sentence to him and he started laughing hysterically. I said, looks like a guy in an emo band canceled himself yesterday.
I saw that. I did see that.
He started laughing. Like because it's such an absurd thing to say, but it's true that a guy, not gonna get into it like a bunch, but basically more or less is like, I'd been unfaithful to my partner and I need to go to therapy, which is great. I think we all like, if we all could access therapy at all times, I think that would be an ideal world. I don't know if there's enough therapists to meet the need if all of humanity started going all at once, but I do think that would be excellent. And I am biased. I was a therapist at one point in my life, but anyways, I said that and he was like, wait, what? So I tell him, yeah, this guy was, I'm assuming, sorry, this person was unfaithful to their partner, and they basically made a public confession and said, I need to go to therapy, which is great. But then also said like, and I'm canceling all future tour dates and stuff to work on that. And while that's absolutely their prerogative to not tour, I think that a lot of people took that to in the context of normally when someone's like, hey, this person is like taking advantage of people, or this person's like really a predatory person. This person's a danger to folks. It sort of just said, I don't belong there. And this launched into this whole discussion of like, my band member mentioned that like my band member was like, I bet you a lot of this person's fans like have like 7 partners, either ethically or unethically. Maybe they haven't, disclosed that to all of their partners, or maybe they do. And their point was, they're just like, it's so interesting that to this person, this thing is like this horrific, like moral wrong thing that's so bad that they don't even deserve to like live their dream and play music. Like they deserve to be like thrown in the bin, sort of. And to other people, they were just like, oh, that's every Tuesday for me or something, And the point is like, that my band member was making was like, you can have these different people that are all like, you know, on the surface, you would think they agree. They're all like, yeah, I'm not a religious person. I'm a leftist or a liberal or a socialist, whatever. I'm like all these things. But then when it comes to especially like sexual expectations or ethics, people can vary so much. And because we now live in a society that I think a lot people are much less like traditioned, like in the sense that like, you know, it used to be people like, oh, I'm a Catholic or I'm a Protestant or I'm an atheist. And these things really like told you a lot about like, just, you know, there was a whole laundry list of things you could expect from it maybe. But I think now we live in such a post-religious kind of more of a secular society that you have this interesting phenomenon where like people are just kind of assuming that other people think the same way about ethics or like right and wrong and morality, because it's like we're everything's just kind of this like nebulous, like it's just very nebulous what people believe and what's expected of them. And while you have these really important social movements like the Me Too movement that's like finding these people, typically men in power, that are using their power to very explicitly manipulate people for their own gain and their own pleasure, that sort of spilled out into this question of like, okay, like, well, where, you know, the gray area, where the dark gray, for sure, that's wrong. But then there's this like light gray. To some people, it's white. To other people, it's black. And there's a lot of confusion. It's kind of like a Tower of Babel moment. That's
exactly what I was thinking when you said that. Like, I know I saw that, and like obviously, like the main thing I saw because of certain bands I follow or some funny people is like people just kind of making light of it because they thought it was so silly in a lot of ways, right? But like there is that question of like, yeah, what when you go from things of like a clearly, you know, like you said, that movement started at a very sound place where it's like, you're talking about people that did crimes against people. If it wasn't a legal crime, it was a moral crime, like a clear, like, and in the, you know, and like, it would be like dealing with, say, like a producer to an actor or an actor to another actor.
There's like an explicit power dynamic. Yeah.
Power dynamic and also like somebody that could just be like rampantly doing, you know, sexual violence or something like that. Right. And then it boils down to, well, my own personal life is not perfect and I did something that was bad or I view as bad. And so now my career is over. And it's like, it's not like we're not sitting here saying that person talked about that was a good thing that they did or something, but you're like, it's very confusing that this is where, and that it was also that the person, you know, we're just using this as an example, right? But like that person that does that for themselves. So where it's like such a weird phenomenon that you're like, I don't even know where the barriers are on this or what defines this. And it's because there are such like you said, there's just such a cloud over like what is the point, right? Like, and it's not about being a morally perfect person that therefore you have to, you know, if you have a moral failing, then your life is over. It's about like a social dynamic, right? Yeah. And then when that gets lost in the plot, it's like it just becomes so opaque. Like you don't even understand where this was coming from. Like I think that's why people were making jokes, because it just felt so odd, you know, like it felt very odd. And yet I bet that's not the only person where something like that has occurred. It was just one that went viral. You know what I mean?
I'm not going to name people, but I toured with I was on Warped Tour with someone years and years ago. And I feel like a year or two after Warped Tour, they were like canceled. They were like kicked out of their band, and you know, I don't think they've done any like thing publicly since then, because they were called out for cheating on their partner while they were on tour. And I remember seeing that, and that never left me, like, because I was like, whoa, like that's that. Yeah. Like the line has moved quite a bit from what I thought it was, you know, from this thing that like we can all agree that it's really wrong for someone to say, the only way, like you'll never get work again if you don't do these things, which is like just blatant, gross manipulation. And it had moved to this person, like did this thing. And I thought it was, I really wonder how much of it is like the hubris of like the modern world is like, people think that they can think anything, that they can just completely sort of like leave behind old patterns and thought structures and social structures, and that there won't be any sense of like a strain, like alienation or confusion. And it's like, okay, so now that people don't have their pastors, because if a pastor cheats on their wife, they lose their job typically, right? Because they're supposed to be this moral arbiter. And it's interesting to see that a lot of people want to hold musicians to that standard. And I can't help but wonder if that is because at some level, even I think subconscious for most people, they desire like role models and arbiters that they can sort of like aspire to be at. And I think because you add in that music can do so much to our emotions and our heart, that it can speak to people's emotions, that when they find out that this musician they liked is not even the worst person on earth, it might not be an R. Kelly situation, but this musician is basically just as crappy as they're capable of being, or did something to someone that their ex did to them. They feel so betrayed because they're just like, I held you so close. But I can't help but wonder if some of that confusion is like, a lot of people don't have like communities and hierarchies and have like actual role models. And so we naturally do that with famous people, whether it's a musician or it's a lot of times like actors or athletes. You see a lot with athletes, unfortunately, like many instances of like domestic violence. And there's a whole another discussion about why that might be, including just like the rampant abuse of testosterone and stuff. But you see a lot of like domestic abuse in sports, and people are just like looking at that like, wow, this athlete that I like cheered and glorified, and I wear their jersey, and they feel betrayed. But then part of it is like, I think people need to look inside and be like, why was I glorifying this person? What is it in me that needed to glorify this person? Because assuming this person didn't say like, look to me as someone to glorify, because I feel like maybe more than some other metal musicians, I've had people, I think, put me in places I didn't want to be, because I do talk about faith. I talk about struggles. I talk about stuff, but like I pretty much every time I've ever been asked to like speak at a church or whatever, I'm like, I'm good. Like, I don't, I'm not making music to do that. And just because I'm talking about faith, I'm not making music for the explicit purpose of like, when Silent Planet's over, I'm going to like start a church and and be this like religious leader that people can like look up to. Because if anything, when I'm writing lyrics, I usually am like writing from a confessional. Like, I see my shortcomings. I see the flaws and the hypocrisy in myself, because and if there's any message I could ever want someone to get from our music, it would be like, do you see all the problems in this world? Okay, now see those problems in yourself now.
Yes. Yeah.
And like, it doesn't stop there, but I think it starts there.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there makes so much sense. Like, you bring up, professional athletes in that instance, right? Like, I think that's even a better example than musicians, because as you said, like musicians, like you said for yourself, when you've been put in situations where like you might write about something that really connects with somebody on a political, social, spiritual level or whatever. And so then I think that kind of parasocial aspect of media in this day and age, especially when we're all so connected and people can see their favorite singer or guitar player or whatever, like they can connect with them literally on social media directly, right? Through messages, comments, whatever. And it's more of like, I don't know, it's become this whole weird parasocial relationship. And in that instance, it's still, I think, kind of like you said, it's not this pastoral aspect that people kind of have kind of put in their minds, maybe on a subconscious level. But for athletes, it's even more of a kind of confession of that kind of part of society, where it's like, you like that person because they're really good at a physical activity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's no, like a sport is not inherently, or acting even, or something is not inherently, it's not inherently, it could be emotional. It's not inherently like moral,
it's amoral.
educational
it's like,
aspect. Yeah.
Especially in sports. It's like they're doing just a particular task that everyone else understands what they're doing, and people can do it most people can do it in some capacity. This person can just do it faster and better and more efficiently.
Right. And yet, with social movements and the connection of celebrity to kind of like the broader scope, especially with social media and television media and all that kind of stuff, where their voices are heard because they have a following, then all of a sudden, say somebody says something that you don't agree with politically, but they're an athlete, like, where's the line that all of a sudden that means that you don't follow them anymore, or you don't like that they're on your favorite basketball team, as an example, or something? And it's like, I get where like people, maybe you don't want to see what that person has to say all the time, but like, why do you no longer like seeing how well they are at 3-pointers, right? Or at running the ball in football or something, I could go on and on with examples, but it's so interesting. Like, I've never thought about it the way you said it in relation to like what people used to have with traditional structures, where we're not putting a value judgment on whether or not you should have those, whether or not but it's just that without those, people, I think, still, we all still want to have something to look up to. And I think there's just like we've said a couple of times, like there's just such this weird gray area of what that even means anymore. Right. And yet you also, you feel, and yet there's no nuance, say, on the internet. So then the next thing you know, if you say, hey, like, that doesn't necessarily matter with why you are interested in what this person does, then it's like, oh, you're condoning what that person's saying on a social, or whatever else, right? Like, but that's a whole other problem, right? Of just lack of nuance in conversations anymore, right?
Yeah, no, oh my gosh. Yeah, it's like I once saw someone like a couple of years ago describe Twitter as like the intentional misinterpretation dialogue.
Yep.
Because you do get a lot of that, where there's this, and sometimes I think it can be like openly fun and mischievous, and other times I think it can be a bit more sinister. But you see people, responding to a lot of stuff, like clearly like trying to interpret that in like a way that's kind of obscure, but could really kind of turn things. It's funny. I recently, my friend, that whole the emo band canceled themselves thing. My friend responded, like quote tweeted it, and was like, this seems crazy. I forget. Like, he said something about it seemed crazy. And then I just replied with my off the cuff thought, where I was like, told this person, I think it's wild that like rock musicians went from like, I'm literally a criminal, like I'm literally a criminal, don't trust me, like I'm a bad person, like in the like less disgusting would be like, I don't know, like I'm violent, like I just hurt people, and it like, and by that I mean like, because some bands were even straight up like talking pretty openly about wanting to be with underage people, and that's bad, right? But in my tweet, really I just simply said, it's crazy that rock musicians went from like, I'm literally a criminal, to like, I've sinned and I'm no longer worthy of playing music, and then he in turn like retweeted that, and I was kind of, when I saw you retweeted it, I was like waiting to see if someone's going to be like, oh, so you think that was cool how it used to be? And it's like, no, that's not the point. I'm just trying to observe this phenomenon to see like how interesting that is, that like that was what rock music was like, it's in some weird way, like, I don't know, like people enjoying this fact that like they're a bad person, and now like this thing where it's so on the opposite, that it's like, yeah, they had a moral failing, and unlike an electrician or a firefighter, or a banker, a lawyer, that like they should lose their job because they were unfaithful to a partner.
Right.
Which like I feel like society typically reserved for like I think clergy people and politicians. I feel like we're
and
maybe
even
the ones.
even anymore, is it politicians? I don't know.
Yeah, I guess it depends on like how gnarly it was, or like how illegal it was, or maybe just how like much of it had to do with their. I do remember like some lady lost her job in politics, and she was like doing like I don't remember what, but it was like ethical and consensual. It was like, I don't know,
it's like probably a polyamorous relationship or something. Yeah,
and she lost it, and I remember that was years ago, and there was such an interesting double standard there, though, that I think a lot of people speculated that, especially male constituents, maybe would just have had this problem with like this person being so like like rebelling against the social norms while like representing them or something politically, even though, and I remember that one struck me because it was like had really nothing to do with the person's job or an abuse of power. It was just kind of like this person does
what they do in
thing.
their personal life.
And but it was so outrageous. But I think that as culture moves towards being more accepting of different ways that people do, religion or philosophy or diet or sex, all these different things have been I think people feel liberated, but then there's also just these moments of mass confusion where someone is so quickly blowing the whistle, being like, that's wrong, and then someone else is like, is it wrong? And then it's like, well, I guess we haven't really like stated as a culture, like, what do we think right and wrong is at this point,
Right. You talk about those like what I would call it most of the time intentional misreading of someone's like opinions or statements or whatever. Like it's like I'll see stuff like that because I'm probably too following of things politically on Twitter, and sometimes I have to remind myself to get off and go outside or something. But you'll see somebody intentionally do that all the time, and it's like the old trope of like someone saying, I like waffles, and then the reply is, oh, so you're a bigot against pancakes or something, and it's like one of those deals, and it's like that's a completely different topic, But it's like that, like well, especially. Like I said, I pay attention to these things both on the ground and online with politics and social issues. And, same thing with music, but it's on like serious issues where maybe someone will have, this has happened to me before where I've seen something from something that, like a Democratic or what's considered a more liberal politician, and I'll see something they've said or something they voted for, and you critique it saying like, I don't, like this is why morally for me, or this is why I think this might be in the wrong direction. And then someone comes back and thinks that you're there for a like you're on the completely different side of the spectrum, that you're like this like reactionary right-wing, like terrible view on social issue, whatever person. And it's like, actually, no, I'm actually coming from the complete opposite side of that, because I want things to be for the best and for like marginalized people and instead you get into this pivot of people that might even actually agree with you on 80% of things, find the 20% and just tell you that you like, I the amount of times I've been like anti-war on something or being, critiquing, imperialism. And then since it was done by someone that's deemed a, liberal champion or something like that I am therefore like,
you must be right wing because you're not okay with the Democrat going to war.
Yeah. Right. I'm not okay with 46 bombs being dropped a day for 20 years from the US government or whatever it is. Right. And it just goes to show that, like, I don't know, like these, like, there's such a toxicity there that you can connect to what you were just talking about with music, where like nobody really even, it's just vapid, right? It's like just this vapid parasocial nonsense that like we're all saying that, and then what's really coming out of it? Nothing's coming out of it, and it's just silly and obnoxious half the time, right?
Yeah, and I think that like, yeah, it is vapid. I think and it lacks a lot of imagination, which I think is a one element of how vapid it is. Like and I think people get so like, they just burn out their imaginations on that website. And they like, I think a lot of times just like, it's just not a very creative dialogue that you see people engaging in.
It's turning very serious issues into like team sports, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so like the moment that you critique a Democrat, they're just like immediately like, therefore you're this, you know? And yeah, it's like team sport. It's just like their team's always the right team, even though the thing, you know, I love the team sports analogy because similar to team sports, and like I love like, you know, I've always grown up watching the Lakers, say, and there's been times sometimes I have this funny experience where, you know, I'm like watching a Laker game and I'm hoping they win, and then I realize I'm like, I could, if I really wanted to, just switch it right now. Like I could notice that like this guy on the Lakers seems like an absolute asshole, and this guy on, say, the Nuggets that they're playing against seems really nice. And I could probably, like, if I really tried to, get myself to root for the Nuggets instead of the Lakers, because you realize it's kind of arbitrary. It's just like I was told as a kid, you're a Lakers fan, and I just did it, you know, to fit in.
Right.
And then at some point, it starts having like an emotional property to it, but you realize like it's totally arbitrary. And I think a lot of people do politics from that level. Unfortunately, they're not really critically thinking about like what they value and why they think that's important, or like what they think will actually get to a solution. They're just told like, this is the right team, you know? And going back to Christian nationalism, for a lot of people, it is a very religious phenomenon, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think so. And to the team thing, I can empathize. I'm a Chicago fan, and I often think I need to switch teams just so I can watch them win at some point. But
Chicago's had some tough time.
Yes, you know, we're still championing the 90s, and we're like 30 years removed from that. But I digress. But yeah, I mean, like all that stuff is important to look at, and you bring up like what you just said there about values. That's something I really have respected about your music a lot. To kind of go to the music a little bit is, you know, we're talking about some of these things. You're clearly like, people throw this word around, I think, pretty willy nilly, but you're a person that comes off in your lyrics and things that I've seen you talk about online or in interviews, principled on certain things, like whether it comes to acceptance of marginalized people, you know, or being, you know, or songs, you know, when it comes to policy issues such as like Lower Empire or something like that with imperialism and war, right? Or you know, even going to Native Blood and just like thinking about like real history and the implications there that people just don't, you know, kind of whitewash in the most real sense, right? Where did some of that come from for you? And then we can, if it works in the conversation, we can kind of dive into a few of these songs in case people don't really know the ins and outs of some of these views and where they come from. But where did some of those views really come from for you?
Yeah. Well, I think,
I know it's a hard question, like who knows where, you know, but
I think for me, a lot of it started with when I was like, so I want to say 17 or 18, I read a book called The Irresistible Revolution by Shane Claiborne. You're probably familiar with it. I think that was the first book that I had read. Definitely not the first written, though one of the more, I think, widely accessed because it was so easy to read, and it was so filled with like examples and really just like heartfelt stories. First book that I read that really just like sort of presented what I said earlier to me about the gospel being inherently like a political story, and not political in the like ridiculous partisan way that we were just kind of discussing with Twitter, but in the way politics meaning life of the city, and the gospel really informing how we treat our neighbors and how like that's what it looks like. And as a kid that grew up in a religious home and wanted to, you know, I think did have a lot of positive experiences within religion, in Christianity, but wanted to like really understand what that meant moving forward as an adult, it just like resonated. I'm like, it's just one of those things that was just so true that I read it. I'm like, yeah, this is it. Like, and so that was really transformative for me. And through that, I, kind of got into some deeper readings on the subject. I think that specifically Shane Claiborne heavily pulls from The Politics of Jesus by Yoder. I think just kind of realizing that, faith and justice were inextricably linked was a big thing for me. And so I think that I kind of just developed for me throughout college. And I grew up in like a small conservative, pretty not a very diverse town. Actually, it's weird. It's in California, but it's one of the more right-wing towns in America. And that's a whole phenomenon. But I moved to LA, and of course, really just, there's things that aren't great about LA, like say the traffic or the cost of living or the smog. And there's things that are great about LA, and the diversity of LA is such an amazing strength that like, I mean, LA is just, and so that was just really great for me to like learn how other people did life. I worshiped at a mosque for like a year of my life. I never really converted to Islam. I just kind of experienced like an interfaith dialogue, like within myself. I wasn't going there being like, I'm a Christian, like I was just like really like listening to the elders of that community and watching how they did life, and seeing a lot of really positive stuff that is less common in like American churches, and really seeing that to some degree, I think their commitment and their closeness did come at the hands of persecution, and hearing stories about how the federal government like persecuted them after 9/11. Like it was an actual thing. They would have vans like parked outside their thing. They would have random people like getting like scooped up, leaving the mosque, and so I listened, and that really moved me a lot. And I think a lot of, just kind of getting outside of my worldview, but also realizing that it's okay to also like stay within a tradition, or to like hold on to important parts of a tradition that like, on a gut level are good. I think it's just so easy for all of us to really throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. That is just a common error that like, learning how to grow without overcorrecting is a challenge,
absolutely.
That was one that took time, but I think that, through education, through life experience, through honestly patient friends, like, I didn't know that I knew gay people when I was like in my like teens, until like my early 20s, when friends started like being like, I'm gay, and being like, oh, like, and like that was important for me to like not think of. I think for a lot of religious people, they think about everything in such exclusively moral terms that a lot of times they don't mean to. Like because I do think overwhelmingly people can be can really overly like kind of simplify, religious people, like, oh, they're judgmental, they're hateful, whatever. I think a lot of times people don't know that they're sort of alienating people with their rhetoric or with how they see things, because they see human experiences as issues. And so it's like, it's kind of like a categorical issue. And I don't know, maybe some people would say, oh, you're giving them the benefit of the doubt. But I would like to be someone that, if anything, could, be able to like look at different traditions that are usually like seen as at war with each other and being like, you really don't disagree as much as you think you do. You just sort of like, there's a lot of assumptions about language. It's like sitting through, man, I don't want to go on that tangent, but I used to sit through a lot of like debates in college, and then you just realize like debating's so like usually pointless. I've sat through a few debates that were actually like interesting because they were more of like constructive dialogues, but a lot of times it's just people with different sets of languages sort of like using the words, and they're not computing. And so then they're responding to the words instead of the ideas.
Yeah, they're kind of speaking past each other,
yeah.
right? Like, and I was listening to there's a few like political, like independent media figures that I listen to on a daily basis, not daily basis, but routine basis. And one of them put it well that people would ask him to debate on these issues or whatever. And he was like, I mean, I'll do it. Like, I've had fun doing that before, but what it really is the WWE of thought. Like, it really isn't, it's just people speaking past each other. And a lot of times when it comes to serious issues, it's who can like use semantics, or who can, kind of what we were talking about with Twitter even before, where like who can like misread something intentionally to get a got you moment to win the debate. Yeah, straw man it. Exactly. Yeah. Straw man it instead of steel manning someone's issues, trying to hear where they're coming from. Because if that's how debates actually were, we would maybe get something out of them, but that's just not what happens, right?
Yeah, I think so. And it's man. That is at the end of the day, that's what partisan media is. It's just straw manning. Like, it's like you see it. Like Fox News will take a clip of like, some young college student with like 8 colors of hair who's they're still learning, and they're kind of oversimplifying something, and then they say something really in a moment that you step back and you're like, that doesn't add up. And then before you know it, it's like, this is what liberals are, this is what they believe and stuff. And you see it on the other, you see it the other direction too. Though I think in the age of Trump, it did get harder for me to like really, I think the age of Trump was weird because Trump brought in, I just think to me, Trump was so obviously like a fool, like in the classic sense of what a fool is, that like, it did become hard for me to like, it became hard to like seriously debate like the merits or like really listen to people tell me about the merits of him. Cause I'm like, this guy's telling me that windmills are causing cancer. Like, it just became so
right. There's a line,
and not just like a one-off, but it's just like, it became like daily absurdity to where it's like, I'll talk about politics, but at a certain point, like, I'm not going to debate the merits of what this guy's saying, because like we have like 20-30 years of like just watching like actual sick narcissism, but like, I am hopeful that for people that want to actually talk about like ideas or like specific issues and policies, that there is still hope. And at least you like to think so, but you do also read the Tower of Babel story in early Genesis and wonder if that's like sort of a way of saying that like language is Sisyphusian. Like, we're going to continue to try to like get to that mountaintop where we can see each other, and it's going to keep going down. Absolutely. Because if you remember in the Tower of Babel, it's pretty weird. God says, let us go down and give them language so as to confuse them.
Right.
Language is not a tool of communication. It's a tool of confusion in that story. And I think about that a lot. Wild. I think about that too much, probably.
Well, I mean, I think it even goes to, because obviously like in that story, in the kind of metaphor of it or the analogy of it, it's not only people speaking language, people speaking different languages. They don't understand each other to a certain degree and all these different things. Yeah. And I think like, I think like that rings even more true with just, again, like you were talking about with just misunderstanding the semantics of what someone's saying, or not really getting where their head's at or whatever else. But like you said, like I've said this on this podcast a few different times when I've been able to talk about these issues with people that like, or you said it earlier too, that people have so much more in common than they really like to even admit that they do, right? Like you were just saying with the straw manning between, Fox News or a liberal outlet, like, well, I'll just MSNBC or CNN or whatever else is out there, that they constantly straw man each other. But like, if you just like sit down with everyday working people, like I was having a conversation with somebody today that I know I identifies as a conservative, like right-wing person. And yet we were talking about the issues facing like farmers and small town farmers, and the consolidation of corporate power that is like knocking them out of their livelihoods, and how hard it is mentally for them, and like what the issues are and how no one's handling it and no one's like speaking up for these people. And we had like a 20-minute conversation where we were in complete agreement, right? Because we didn't talk about semantics. We didn't talk about like what person you would vote for in a given election or some stupid thing.
You just talked about what things that matter.
Yeah, right. And when you do that with people, like, I don't know. I mean, there's, like you just said, especially within the last, 8 years or so, there are people that just have wild beliefs that like are kind of promoted out there bigger and bigger. But for most everyday people, like if you can just sit down and communicate with them in an honest way and hear them where they're at. I think a huge thing is just meeting people where they're at too, not trying to scold them into what you view on every little issue. Yeah. And not to say that you have to agree with an issue that they have, a belief that they have that you don't agree with. That's not what it is, but it's just meeting people where they're at and showing positivity and making real human connections and conversation. And that's where like, hopefully at some point that can lead to, there's a lot of barriers that you could talk about for the next 4 hours on that. But hopefully, the hope would be that when people actually do that, as opposed to just bickering and wanting to believe that they're in some camp of belief that something good can come out of it, whether it's on a small scale communally or on systemic change. Right. Like, I think and so. That's just where real communication is huge, and I just think a lot of people miss that in the very chaotic times we're in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think people miss that. I think people miss each other, and I love that example of talking about farming with your conservative friend, because I think it's so true, and it's, man, that's the tough thing. That's I think a thing that's frustrating for a lot of people that watch political discussions like you and I might be, who would be considered more on the left, which in America doesn't really mean much anymore. But
right.
I think like I can't help but like look at that and be like, man, if we could only like set aside the things that people are not going to change their minds on anytime soon, say like abortion, say I don't know what other things are super hot topic issues all the time, but certainly abortion, probably the one that the most like people just aren't, because there's a lot of philosophical concepts about what is a life and right. Also like what is free choice, and does freedom extend to that discussion. But like if we could somehow put that aside long enough for people to just like look at how corporations are completely infecting like every aspect of life, and like how they're completely controlling the choices that are being made in DC, and how corporations are really just like stripping people's rights from them, and are really that's what's running up wealth inequality more than anything. And like if the 90, like they say, the 99 point whatever % of people could just, identify that and agree with that. And I think it's frustrating because we won't, but it's like, man, like a lot of progress could be made. We could continue to have our fights and our squabbles over these other things. Not everything would be perfect, but we would, right. I think that like working people would have a fighting chance at surviving in the next 20 years if people could seriously do that. But I think corporations who run the news, who own those networks, do obviously, as we all know, have a vested interest in not really allowing working people to unite. Because that would be very problematic for them, and it always has been.
Right. And that's even especially, I was having another conversation with somebody not that long ago where like, it's especially here. Of course it happens in other countries. Like, it's not like the US is like the only place where these things happen, but you can look at like certain issues, like things going on in France right now, where they were talking about like raising the pension age by 2 years. And with that topic and the rising cost of things and wages not going up, millions of people are in the streets. Like, they're shutting down the electricity for billionaires and politicians. Like, the unions are literally cutting it off and sending it to other places for free, and like all these other things. And where's that on mainstream media here? It's nowhere, because that media is owned by people that don't want you to see that. Right. So it's like, and that's sometimes I say some things like that and I feel like I need to get out a tinfoil hat and put it on, but it's not, it's real. Just like, it's real. And if people saw that more often here, and we were just, so much of it is just what people see on a day-to-day basis. And I use the word vapid too much, but I think it's just really a word that describes a lot of media here. Like, it just pits things pits people against each other with things that just ultimately don't matter, or at least aren't like the core of the problem. Like, you brought up abortion as an instance of something that's very, I would say like socially, like socially dividing, like in a pure form, like you said, in a philosophical way. Like, that would always be an issue for people, but like all these other issues where people would connect on, if that was talked about, like, there's the argument of like, it's kind of like the argument on gun violence, right? Where like people talk about gun regulation and this and that, but if you helped people live in a better, like if you helped people out of poverty and desperation, and you helped people have access to mental health, and if you helped people have all these other aspects, and we would still have that conversation would still be there. Yeah. But you cannot tell me that actually doing those concrete things would not be of the benefit of cutting down on those statistics. Right. And yet that's not in the realm of conversation, right? Like that, it's either you're for this or you're against that. And it's like, well, it's a lot more complicated than that. And studies show that. And if people were just given access to those more nuanced conversations from media, rather than whatever gets them the most clicks or sells the most ads or whatever else, then we'd be in a much better place, right? Like, if we got to the point where it was like, all right, nobody's starving and needing to do violence to survive, or no one's getting put down this rabbit hole to violence because of like a systemic desperation, like, then it would be on I'm not a genius, Garrett, right? Like, I'm not sitting here saying I have the answers. I'm just saying like there's so much nuance to these topics that is just never brought up on, the mainstream scope of discussion. Right. And that's where it's so frustrating. It
is. It's sad that people pay for like intentional corporate fed disinformation,
yes.
And it's like, of course they pay for it. It's so on the nose, like,
yeah, right.
it's whereas, for free, they could, just be like reading about the actual issues as they stand. It is very frustrating, my friend.
Yes, it is. Well, thanks for talking about all this, Garrett. It's been awesome. I was wondering, do you still have time? Okay. I just never like to overstep my bounds on the time scale here, but would it be cool if we talked just about a couple of your songs, since we've been talking about these subjects? If we talk about a few of these songs, all right. So that. I figured I've got a whole list of them here that I thought would be good, but I thought I'll maybe pick a few here, but I guess from the newest record, my favorite song on the record, also, I guess it was a weirdly divisive one for you guys because you swore in it. It's so funny to me. But Alive as a Housefire, I was, it's one of the songs that you're really kind of clearly talking about, I guess, things we've already talked about at length here a bit, but you're talking about different things regarding systemic issues and the United, you reference literally like America in the song and things of that nature. Can you speak to a little bit of what the inspiration was for that song and where like what the lyrical direction of that song is?
I think so. Wrote it in the summer of 2020, which I feel like will go down in history. Summer of 2020 will like usually the Black Lives Matter protests, or maybe just in general, like people protesting unfair or just the many policing issues in our country. And something that, like, I've never said this before out loud, but something that really honestly got it is there's like a lot of bands that I've toured with, especially like as our band grew and started touring with like bigger, more like worldwide like touring acts. It became really common to see. It became really common at that time, this thing that I had never seen before, which is I'm not going to name names. There's a lot of bands that like have like internal policies. I know this because they've told me, have like internal policies of like, we don't talk about politics in the band. Like, I don't know exactly how far they go. Like, I mean, in person they can, but I mean to say, like, on the internet, like, their bands are intentionally apolitical, because something that I've learned I've learned very seriously is, like hardcore is pretty, like, hardcore and punk are pretty left wing and pretty underground. Metal, and by extension metalcore, is actually, like, I would say pretty like 50-50, like probably like more like America, like representative of the country, where like there are certain bands I've toured with who I know from experience have a whole lot of like cop fans that are like they're like, one band I toured with, I remember like there was a bunch of cops backstage and I thought like something had gone on. And they were like, oh no, we're all just here to watch the headliner, and I was like,
oh God, yeah, that would be so unsettling.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, because I went up and asked them, I'm like, is there an issue or something? And they were like, oh, we're just here to watch, and they just get in for free, I guess, because they're in uniform. I don't know, but anyways, but it's not, it just yeah. I found it was pretty common that these bands, who I knew were, like they had made a point of it to not be like political, as it was it's a business decision. They were just like,
right.
They make enough money to like live comfortably, and it is extremely, extremely hard. It's one thing to like be a band and put out good songs and stuff. It's another thing to like make a career out of music, to like consistently year after year bring in enough money to like live off of. And some of these bands even like, get a house and stuff, or like support a family and stuff. It's not easy. And it takes a lot of hard work. And so I think a lot of those bands are just looking at it like, like, we're not gonna like talk about what we think politically, online or anything, because like, why risk living the dream that like less than a fraction of musicians ever get the chance to like live the dream of doing music? Like, why would we throw it all away just to like spout off our opinions, which as everyone's doing that on the internet. So I understand like logically like why they make that decision. But it is funny because I remember one of them telling me that, and I was like kind of trying to not like laugh or something, smile, because like they know who I am, they know what I think, and they know that like I from the get-go, like I'll say things and it's very common. People be like, well, you lost a fan because of this or that. And I'm just like, sure. Like, what do you think I'm going to do? Like, oh, sorry about Native Blood. I take it back. Like it's like, clearly it's a choice that I'm making in our music. And I'll like, I don't want to do music if I can't do it the way that I feel called to do it, the way that I feel like I can be proud of. So, and I'm not saying those bands suck or they can't be proud of themselves, but
right.
This is the funny thing. when the horrific things that happened in 2020 starting, I think a lot of people would say the fuse went off when George Floyd was murdered by, I think Derek Chauvin was his name.
Yeah.
Those bands that told me that they were so apolitical, they were posting Black Lives Matter stuff because at the time there was so much social pressure. Like the movement was so big that like they clearly
people would get called out for not doing something.
They clearly realized that like they have to, because just as much as it was a business decision to not ever talk about anything politically previous to then, if they're doing it now, you have to only assume it's a business decision, because why would you reverse a policy that you've had for more than a decade, right? So, and so I thought that was really interesting. And I think that a lot of like, because I think there's a lot of obvious things in that song, like me saying fuck the system. Like I think everyone kind of knows what that means, but there's some more subtle sort of references, I guess, that I put into that song about this, like, well, I say at one point, like, will my anesthetized half-life still suffice to stifle what life we hoard till we die? We hide in the guise of benevolence until the system burns. And that for me was a critique of like artists that could basically just be like, oh, like I'm not going to say anything, so you can all just think that I agree with you or whatever. And until like there's enough pressure, then I'll like post like a black square on my Instagram, and then I'll go back to my policy of like not challenging social violence. And I'm not like mad at those bands or anything as much as like I just really was like, this is a fascinating thing that I think very few people on earth even know about. So I never wanted to like, this is the first time I've ever talked about it because you're really cool, and why not?
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Like seriously, because I didn't want to talk about it when we put the song out, because I didn't really want that to be the point of the song.
But you don't want it to be stemming of negativity and
because I wanted the point of the song to be about the social ills and the larger thing. But I think in truth, a big reason why I wrote that and what I was thinking of when I wrote that was these bands, these bands of, you know, white dudes, which is, you know, pretty common in metalcore, you know, who kind of have this policy of like, well, hey, we got a lot of conservative white dude fans, and if we just don't really ever say anything besides, like, I mean, they can be like, oh, you know, like corruption system, because, you know, both sides use those terms, but if they can just really stay away from anything that like critiques things that they know are going on in our society, you know, those fans of theirs can be like, oh, you know, these guys agree with me. You know, they can kind of just like live in that sort of obscure place. And that's why I say like hide in the guise of benevolence until the system burns. And it's like, you know, things can go downhill, but like no one's, you know, there's so many problems and stuff that like no one's ever going to be like, this band's never political, screw them. And I don't think that's the goal. But it is interesting that like it's just kind of the comfort of neoliberalism that they can sort of just be like, hey, like, you know, I just want like these general terms like fairness and peace and whatever, but without really putting skin in the game. And then I was excited that we were in a time that people were so passionate about stuff and having real conversations that like, in one sense, it is weird, I guess, that people are like, oh, you didn't post a black square, you don't care about the movement. I think like any times there's like corrections or like legalisms where people kind of like miss the heart of it. And I think for a short bit of time, I was even hoping maybe these bands are going to start, like maybe this is just a wake up call for them. But I think it became the case that no, it was just kind of like they had to. But I think that's a really interesting thing, that things got so real culturally that these bands had to break decade-long like policies.
Yeah. Yeah, that is super interesting. Thanks for going into that, because that makes that song like, I'm somebody that when a new record comes out, I like to dive through the lyrics, just because like you never, sometimes you might miss something when you're just listening to it or whatever else. And that specific line, I actually thought it was probably, it works with that. So, but I thought it was probably a critique maybe of like it's the same exact thing of like the big corporations were like, I had a Fire Stick on my TV at the time.
Yeah.
And, like Amazon, big letters, Black Lives Matter on the front, all the while they're like letting, predominantly, or proportionally more like minority workers work in terrible conditions in a warehouse and die on the, die in the warehouse floor or something. Right.
Yeah. But, it's like, yeah, which Black Lives Matter to Amazon, right? Like,
yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Like,
no, or the what was it? The Kylie Jenner Pepsi commercial.
Oh, the Pepsi commercial. Yes. That was so bad. Bad.
It happens every year. Like, I think it happens all the time when like it's like Pride Month or what have you. And yeah, corporations are like doing the rainbow thing, and it sounds cynical, but I think we know it. I think it's further than cynicism. I think we know that the corporations it's a business decision. It's like, people do want to see this, that, they did some polling and enough of their list people will feel identified by this marketing thing. And that's, I think that can sometimes get in the way of progress. This idea that, things can just be sold so much that they lose their meaning. And then people forget, like, no, like, these movements do matter and they are powerful. They're not just like things that are said. But a lot of times I think that can lead to like furthering people's just sense of like apathy about real issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So again, thanks for going through that. That was really interesting. You brought up Native Blood. That was one of the other ones I wanted to go into. I know people probably know a little bit more about that one. That's one you guys have had out for a while, but it's one that I think, there's the recent things that came up. I say recent, it was probably last year. I don't know. Time is a blur, like I said before, but where you continue to see things even up in Canada or in the United States of
discovering like mass graves
and all that kind of stuff. Pretty obvious from the song title, but in case anybody, I do have listeners that might not have listened to your band too much before dove into the lyrics. Do you mind saying just a little bit about what that song is about? Because it's also kind of like a historical context one that I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah. Gosh, it's been a long time now, but I think it was about almost precisely probably about 9 years ago. I was in graduate school for my master's in psychology degree, and I attended a seminar led by a Native American lady who was talking about cultural trauma in her tribe. And she was talking about how like trauma gets passed on through generations, and was talking about, the genocide of the Native people. And I think like a lot of people, I was aware of that to some degree, just from like, it's pretty hard to ignore like a mass genocide on the continent you live on at some point.
Right.
Despite it, not really being adequately taught in schools, but I still kind of knew about it for sure. And then, but I'm listening to this person talk about in giving us like case studies with names, obviously not the real names of the patients, but of like the stories of the people that she'd worked with and with the work she was doing on the reservation. And that really made that come alive for me. And really like I just wanted to write a song on that topic because it was so real to me. And that seminar really was a game changer. And I think it just kind of opened my eyes to how like it's a lot of the a lot of the violence is still going on and is still being perpetuated. And,
well, let alone with like sorry, I mean to cut, but like, like with the current, you can talk about, you talk about cultural trauma and the current issue. I mean, you can talk about, with that today, I think a lot of people don't realize that in those communities, there's such a proportionally high amount of deaths of despair, right? Like of addiction, of poverty, of whatever else, due to things that have perpetually happened for, since the origin of this country, right? And you can see it perpetuate in real time still today, right?
Yeah, and I think that there's been in some cases attempts at reparations, but the sad truth, and it's not to say that there's like no meaning or use for reparations, but I do believe the sad truth of the matter is that like there's reparations can not really be fully made when you when you steal people's land and you try to erase their culture and you abuse their children. It's not to say there's no chance of growth or there's no future, but it's also not going to just go away.
Right.
And it is passed on generationally. And that was something that really stuck with me and kind of led me to want to write about that song, that topic. Yeah,
it's talking about the reparations aspect of that, and I'm sorry that I'm going on some tangents here when I talk about these things, but yesterday I was learning about kind of the cobalt mines in the Congo, right? And all the different exploitation that happens in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And you bring up reparations, and they were talking to listening to this independent news media outlet that if anybody listening wants to check it out, it's called Breakthrough News. They do a lot of foreign policy stuff and look at things from a very objective, or everyone's biased, but a pretty objective lens. And
I'm looking it up right now.
They were talking about, I forget the kind of historian that they were talking to, but they're talking about reparations and all that kind of stuff. And people promote reparations are great. I think that needs to happen. That absolutely needs to happen. But like what he was talking about is like, what number do you put on this? Like there is no number. There is no quantifiable number you can throw out there when you look into the history of this and the damages and the implications, and just like, because it's not just about money, it's about resources being taken and lives, like whole communities being exposed to uranium and like all these different things. And it's all for us to like have smartphones and computers and everything that we use, and there's no such thing as clean cobalt, and it's just like this massive thing. And he was talking about some alternatives of what they could do that likely in the current situation that we have globally will just not happen. But it was just very interesting, kind of the parallels there, where you can talk about righting some wrongs financially, but it's not just financial. Like you said, it's cultural. I like that phrase, cultural trauma, that like there's like you can try to do the best moving forward, but that will never take back what's happened, I guess, right? Not to be bleak. That's not bleak. That's just an objective thing to say, right? That's just reality, and if people get mad about that, then they just don't like to a certain extent, like to face reality and look at something in a true, more objective lens, right?
Yes. Yeah. There's, are you familiar with Chris Hedges?
Yes. I love Chris Hedges.
Yeah. He, I just discovered him like, a few months ago, and just kind of became obsessed. And I did most of the night driving on our most recent North America tour after our van crashed. I was like, I'm just going to do most of this night driving here. So I started just doing late drives, and I would just listen to his speeches. Incredible command of the English language, and amazing writer and orator. And he would delve into he did a really interesting job delving into a number of topics. But one thing that he would talk a lot about is, I don't know if he used it exactly this way, but about like unhelpful optimism or like toxic optimism. This idea that like things won't get better just because people might, sort of embrace this like overly like, like the Obama campaign of like hope. It's like, well, hope is empty if you're just going to keep selling people out to banks, like
right.
It's not even really optimism. In a sense, it's just like really deeply cynical. And that was that was something that I think a lot about. And so I think that when we talk about, these traumas won't just go away. It's not to be pessimistic, but it's also to resist the gaslighting type of optimism. That's just like, this and this, and we can we have to be able to say this issue won't be going away, but it doesn't mean you don't fight it. If anything, I think there's a spiritual practice of like finding hope in things that seem hopeless on the face of them, finding hope in the fact that that you're fighting the fight that needs to be fought, and knowing that like this is where you're going to use your voice, and it matters. And I think that this person who was giving a speech about trauma on the reservation and just sharing these powerful things really did impact my life, because I was like, wow, like this, they see it for what it is, but they're pledging their life against it. And that moved me to write that song. And so it's cool to think that if that song has been reached anyone or meant anything for anyone, it goes back to that person that is willing to fight, this incredibly dark issue, and to address it with love and helping people in the community.
Yeah. And, you've brought up cynicism a couple of times, like, back with the Black Lives Matter topic and stuff. I always argue that it's more cynical to do maybe what those bands did or those corporations did to I forget what the term is that people said. It was like elite capture or like corporate capture or something, where like you take a social movement and then you kind of bastardize it for business needs, right? As opposed to, it's not, people can view things like these topics we're talking about as like you're so, you're down and cynical on the world affairs or on history or on, social issues, political issues. And it's like, actually, no, this is talking about things the way they are and wanting things to be better, and realizing again that fake positivity or cynical positivity doesn't mean that something like that doesn't mean you have a better outlook because you think of more sunshine and rainbows on a given topic, right? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I think that's been a common issue among a lot of different Democratic politicians, and people can kind of see through it. And if anything, that just gets weaponized by a lot of, I think on the other side, we'll end up getting just weaponized by more right-wing figures that are like, look at this, like this obviously like glib response to these issues. These people are not, you can't trust them. And then that just feeds into just the outright cynicism of just like, well, whatever you hear. I just heard the other day someone say on Fox News, like, I don't see us running out of fossil fuels in my lifetime. And the dude's like 65 or something. And it's just like
to be fair, he's probably saying that to his audience, which is also 65, 70 years old, right?
And you just think it's like, oh, he said it. Like,
right.
I know it's implied. Like Ben Shapiro does a better job of implying that it won't affect us. But like this guy just kind of said it, and it was pretty funny. I mean, it's dark, but it's also just like, I don't know.
It's at least they're saying it out loud.
There's something to be
right?
said about being able to laugh about the absurdity of things in our time. And I think that's where, like, for me, that at some point, social media, like Twitter, just kind of became like ridiculous responses to ridiculous.
I've loved those. I meant to say that to you earlier when we were talking about Twitter recently, like, because again, like I've actually made a point of spending less time.
Yeah, same.
It, but it's
always funny. That's a good point, by the way. Like anyone listening to this, don't spend much time on that thing. Like, for sure, if you want to check in for 15, 20 minutes a day, I don't think it's going to really negatively affect your life. But, and I say this from experience, I used to wake up and just open Twitter and like scroll Twitter before I would like get vertical and start my day. And I read, nonetheless, it was like under some Jordan Peterson tweet, which can be full of nonsense, but some person's like, oh, self-help thing. And I was like, clicked it. And the person like listed a bunch of things and they're like, don't open Twitter for the first like 2 or 3 hours of your day. And I've been like doing that and it actually has helped me. So yeah. Anyways, before we go into Twitter, anyone like listening to this, I just feel like I should say that, like,
absolutely.
Don't let that into your life too much because it can be really bad.
Well, it can just shape your whole worldview into something it shouldn't be, right?
Yeah.
But your responses on things have been so funny because they're so dryly sarcastic that like the replies are both people getting in on the sarcasm and people thinking you're absolutely serious.
And like right-wing people agreeing with me. Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh my God, this is because like I'm not as funny as that. Like I would try to do something like that and it's just so funny. Like it's like I don't know, the way it's even like all lowercase, no punctuation, just like it's, just like, I don't know what it was, but I was seeing that the other day and I was like, that is fucking hilarious.
It's ridiculous.
You know what I
mean? It's like, and I think it happens because like you mentioned nihilism earlier. We're in like a deeply nihilistic period of culture. And I don't know if we go deeper into the black hole or not. But like at a certain point, it just became like if someone's going to agree with you, they'll agree with you, even if you're like literally making the most absurd straw man, or you're saying, like people on like right-wing people on Twitter just being like, it should be required for everyone to say the national anthem every day before school. And it's like, that's like absurd if you just think about it on its face. Like, so what, we're going to put 5-year-olds in jail because they don't like want to do it? Like it's just like craziness. But like, it's I guess some people would say in a sense, it's that, what is the term that, people, virtue signaling. It's like, it's kind of it's like sort of the like, because you see it on like, or you'll see like someone, like some like main centrist like Democrat like account that like preaches to people that were Republicans a year ago or something. That's just like, racism is bad and that's why I vote Democrat or something. And you're just like, wow, that helps no one. Like racism is bad. Like, yes.
What a hot take, right?
Yeah, like a hot take to get like traffic or something. You know what I mean? And you see the right-wing versions of it, which like is like just like over the top, like patriotic stuff to the point of like being like almost ridiculous. Like it's hard to not think it's funny. And so I think when I say it, it's just like just to like agree with them, and then like stipulate like and so therefore like. Yeah, we need to like start throwing kids in jail like that aren't going to do this, and like, and then like see people like agree with you, and you're just like, wow, like, you know what I mean? Like it's wild. Yeah,
there's some things I've seen like that where I've seen other people kind of do a similar thing where like there's some kind of right-wing pundits that, I mean, the thing is about independent media, like the one I referenced earlier, Breakthrough News, like fantastic. Like there's some people out there that like are crowdfunded that are really on the ground doing great things. And then on the other side of the spectrum of things, I mean, both sides of the spectrum politically, but on the other side of the spectrum, like quality wise, there's people that just have like, there's no way to believe what they're saying, right? Like I'll be convinced that I'm looking at a troll account that has like 500,000 followers.
Like the
but
Nick
apparently
Adams
it's
guy.
A real, that's exactly what I was thinking of. I'm like, that has to be like a deep-seated troll account. And then I'll look it up and he's done interviews and he's done all that. And I'm like, is this like
paid to speak at places?
Yeah.
In
I thought it was like
particular,
birds aren't real type deal. You know what I mean? Like I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. In particular, I really. Yeah, he's an interesting one because a lot of them are just like Tommy Lawrence or something are just like absurd and
not interesting either.
Yeah,
right?
Not interesting and just making like bizarre arguments, or like during Black Lives Matter, like what are they even protesting about? It's like, Tommy, I'm pretty sure you could figure that out if you wanted to know why, because there was like a thing that happened and now they're protesting. But like there's that kind of thing. But yeah, then there's the people that even go further into the insanity, and you're just like, you start to wonder, like, if at the very least, maybe they're more centrist and they think, oh, like the further, you know, kind of the loudest voice issue that the internet so often has, which is like, yeah, the loudest voice will win. The person just like screaming like obscene ideas about reality, that might be the best way to get attention on the internet, you know, because to be nuanced or something is like boring. Right.
I mean, people want soundbitey things that are 3 sentences that seem like you have it all figured out in a sentence or 2, right? Well, I could talk to you all day. I don't want to take all of your time today. I really appreciate your time. This has been fantastic. This is probably my favorite episode I've done with somebody.
Well, thank you for having me. Seriously. Who have you had so far?
So far it's been, I've done a couple local bands. I've done I've done a political commentator and a community organizer out here in Chicago. I just talked to, his episode will drop 2 weeks before yours. This one will be out in like 2 weeks. I just talked to Benny from Avoid. That'll be out on Monday.
Dude, I love Benny.
Yeah, he talked about you a bit too. He was just like, that tour was amazing. Like, loved it so much. We talked about that a bit.
There's a guy in Avoid, Nick, who is very thoughtful, and him and I had some really cool, like, I think we both learned a lot from each other on tour discussions about like U.S. foreign policy and stuff. And
maybe I should try to get him on here.
He's cool.
Then, huh?
Yeah. Cool. If you're ever looking for someone, hit up Benny, but hook me up with Nick. Nick is very thoughtful and has a lot of really interesting perspectives on things too. But they're all amazing. Benny's one of the hardest working, sweetest guys I've ever toured with, and he's like a natural rock star. Like, he gets on stage and like, he's just one of those people. Like, I think that like I'm like a writer who is in a band, and so part of my job is to perform. But like Benny is like born to be on stage. Like, Benny is a natural rock star.
I got that vibe from him because like I was a little nervous because I didn't, I get nervous about these things. I'm still pretty new at this, and
you're doing a great job.
I just come on. Thank you. I appreciate it. But he logs on and he's just like, hey, what's up? Just like so energetic.
Dude,
and I was like, wow, that's great.
Like every band wants to take Avoid on tour because they're in like, it's just a matter of time.
They're so energetic too, right?
Yeah. I mean, like, it's just a matter of time till they're like the band that like is playing the huge rooms and stuff. Like I tell them all the time, I'm like, I had them open some shows for us last year. And I just remember telling them like, they were like, oh, thanks for having us. I was like, just promise me that in like 3 or 4 years, you'll take my band on tour. Because like, I have no doubt that like, you'll be like playing freaking, big 3,000 cap rooms and selling them out.
They've got that like arena.
Yeah.
They've got that arena energy.
They do. And it's cool. And they're just great people. Awesome people.
Right.
Awesome people. They care about what matters. I love them because it's like, there's always been kind of the like fun party metal type bands. And they're cool because they're that, but they're like, are like good people that care about marginalized people still. And like, I've seen them like go out of their way to make venues like a safer, better place for people. And I'm really happy that could be the future of like energetic, kick-ass rock and roll metal, and not like, I don't know, just like gross people.
Yeah, that you can be like a party metal band and still be decent human beings that love people. Yeah. That because we didn't have that 10 years ago too much, did we? Right.
And it's funny because Avoid's pretty outspoken about some of those other bands, which is an interesting thing too. But man, dude, thank you for having me. This was really great.
Before I let you go, I know you guys put out that last song Signals last year. I got to do a little bit of this normal interview stuff here for a second, I guess. Right. So you guys put out that song Signal last year, which it's so heavy, so good. I was like, God, this rips. Like the breakdowns and all that are like, I don't know if the rhythms and everything I should say in that were just so sick.
Thank you.
I know you guys have teased a little bit that you're doing some. You probably can't obviously announce anything, but are we going to see some more Silent Planet music this year?
Yeah, there will be an album by the end of this year. I don't know when exactly.
Right.
It's not done, and we got to go to Europe pretty soon.
Right.
So it won't be finished. We're not going to have a chance to get back and finish it till after Europe. But our goal is to be done making it like sometime in the spring, so that it can be released sometime later in the year.
Sick. So everyone should be, if you like this discussion, if you like Silent Planet and everything that goes on with the music, which if you're listening to this, you probably do, make sure to look for that new record by the end of the year. I know you guys are going out with Era, Invent, Animate, and Sentinels in Europe. I do have a few listeners out in Europe as well. So if you see that coming up, I think it's February and March, right? That you guys are going out there. So make sure to check that out. That's a sick lineup, by the way. I wish that was coming to Chicago, because I would love to see all those bands together. That's so cool.
I'm excited. I'm really excited.
Yeah. That'll be really, really cool. So again, thanks, Garrett, so much. Check out Silent Planet on all streaming platforms, et cetera, et cetera. You guys can just Google Silent Planet or go to their website. I know Garrett's Silent Garrett on Twitter. Those are my quick plugs. And is there anything you? One thing I do have to have you do is I kind of ripped this. Or wait, there's two things I forgot about this. If you have just 5 minutes. I asked this question to Benny, and I asked the question to the previous band that I'm going to put out a little bit later as well. If you could, I'll just do the tour one. I did 2 with him, but I'll do the tour one. If you could open for or if you could have a 3-band package of any bands, that would either make sense living, going right now, or retired, legacy, whatever. It could be anything from Meshuggah to Tool to Papa Roach to whatever. I just named off some weird bands there, but you get what I mean. If you could do a 3-band bill for any bands, what would you do for a tour? What would be like your dream 3-band bill?
So us and 2 other bands.
Yeah. You have to be playing. Yeah. So you could be the headliner. You could be the opener. You could do it whatever way you want. But a dream 3-band bill for Silent Planet.
I would say Deftones and Me Without You.
Oh, Deftones. That would make a lot of sense with you guys too. I know
Deftones and Me Without You, probably.
I know Mitch is a big fan of Deftones, and there's a lot of influence of that in the music and all that, right?
Yeah.
So, and Me Without You, that's
for me, especially lyrically, is the number
such a
one.
good band. I haven't listened to them in a while. This is going to make me go back and listen to them.
They did just break up. I flew to Philadelphia to go to their last ever show. But amazing band. Amazing band. All right. Well, that's great. All right, Garrett, thanks so much. And then also what song would you want to play at the end of this from Silent Planet? Well, I guess we'll just do Alive as a Housefire because I feel like that maybe is the most relevant for this podcast,
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. It works with it. Yeah. Thanks so much, Garrett. And all the best, man.
Hey, appreciate it. See you, brother.